G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Sunday 29th of March 2015. This should be the very dag end of The Outsiders plus First Dog on the Moon.
Thank you to Jeremy Clarkson for bringing us all together. Tim Colbatch has joined you, author, former economics editor of The Age. Sarah Lamarquin, columnist, contributing opinion editor of the Daily Telly, editor of a news site, Rendezvous, that's view like looking, .com.au, and Dr. Anita Heiss, adjunct professor, Junbunna Indigenous House of Learning, University of Technology, Sydney. Thanks to you all, 5 to 10.
Hello, Patriots. Welcome to First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living. I'm Walkley Award-winning cartoonist for The Guardian Australia, First Dog on the Moon. This week, wasps. What are they doing? And why do they want to kill us? The orange spider wasp, Cryptocaelus bicolor, lays its eggs inside a large spider. The wasp drugs the spider and stuffs it into a burrow until its children hatch and they burst out and eat the spider host alive, not unlike the New South Wales Labor Party. Imagine if New South Wales had an election and nobody came. An election was held recently in New South Wales, and what a dreary affair it was. Here's something you may not know. The vast majority of people in New South Wales hate privatisation, the sale of public assets. In fact, it's quite unpopular right across the nation. And Mike Baird, the Liberal leader in New South Wales, committed to privatising part of the electricity network. Wasps! Anyway, the vast majority of voters said no. The New South Wales Labor Party campaigned on not privatising the electricity industry and also that rich Chinese people are bad. And yet, the Liberal Party maintained a winning lead in the polls throughout the entire campaign. In New South Wales, they hate New South Wales Labor more than they hate privatisation, which they really hate. Oh, and it's not just in New South Wales. People are sick and tired of the Australian Labor Party everywhere. And I should know because I'm one of them. Just the other day, the federal opposition leader, Bald Scrotum, no, hang on. You know who I mean. Blinky Bill, or whatever his name is, him and the rest of the federal Labor Party just waved through the Tony government's data retention legislation. Thanks to the Australian Labor Party, the security agencies, who nobody trusts, will now know who you call, email or text. They'll know everywhere you go with your phone. Oh, hang on, I'll just get that. On the moon. Oh, hello, Senator Brandis. How can I help you? Yes, I'm just at the ABC. Oh, well, yes, of course, you knew that. And you're just double-checking the data, of course. Oh, let me see. It was 2 eggs, poached, runny, and sourdough toast, and a flat white. But I thought you could get all this from the metadata. Oh, I see a special VIP National Treasure metadata package. Does it come with an iPhone 6? No. Gold class? Oh, well, no, Senator, I don't think so. But thanks anyway. Now, where were we? Yes, the New South Wales Labor Party. So, the Australian people are a large drug spider, and federal politics. Can you turn the wasp sound effect down, please, Clifford? It's a bit loud. No, you haven't turned it off. I can still hear it. Unless... Oh, my God. It's Sam Dastiari. I'll have to run and hide in Mark Scott's spa. Oh, it's full of ducks. Well, thanks for listening, Patriots. This has been First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living from the First Dog on the Moon Institute. You're welcome.
See, I told you to have ducks. The Sunday Extra podcast, you can get that on.
Okay, well, what can one say? New South Wales has had an election. The Labor Party's picked up 10 seats. The Greens have picked up 4 seats. The Liberal Party is still in power. The National Party is overjoyed because they've only lost 4 seats to the Greens. They've hung on to a few others. And I'm beginning to think that the Labor Party should consider the idea of banning comb-overs as a hairstyle for their leaders. I think one of the reasons that Bill Shorten's got 0 cut through is because you take one look at him and you think, oh, there's a vainglorious popinjay who thinks that he can pull his pubic hair up through the crack of his ass and train it to grow over the top of his ears and pretend that he isn't bald. I'd been hearing about the new Labor leader, because the previous Labor leader was a wicked, evil person who represented a constituent in a letter to the Department of Community Services and said, I have a constituent who is aggrieved because you won't let him see his kids even in a supervised visit. Can you possibly rethink this for him? Now, any member of parliament does that for any member of any citizen who lives in their electorate, any resident who writes to the member of parliament and says, I've got a problem. It doesn't mean that the member of parliament supports the individual citizen in their grievance. It just means the citizen goes to the representative. That's what they are, the elected representative. The elected representative sends their grievance to the appropriate people who will make a decision on it. But for doing that, the previous long-standing Labor leader got shit canned, and they brought this Foley bloke in. And I'd heard him talking on the radio, and he seemed to make a reasonable amount of sense for a Labor leader in New South Wales. And finally I got to see him, and once again, he's got his pubic hair trained to grow up over his ears, and he's combed it over to try and pretend that he's not bald. I got nothing against bald men, nothing against bald women either. But if you are bald, for God's sake, for my sake, for pity's sake, for humanity's sake, stop trying to pretend. I don't think putting a wig on it makes it that much less ridiculous to look at. So, that's politics in Australia. Comb-overs don't work. Apparently, the Greens have somehow managed to win 4 seats without actually changing their vote. Like, they didn't get any more votes, percentage-wise, but they won 4 seats. So perhaps the Greens have campaigned brilliantly, or perhaps the people in Ballina and Northern Rivers just really bloody hate coal seam gas, and they reckon the National Party have sold out to the Liberal Party because that's what the National Party does. Or perhaps, as some people have suggested, when the superannuated yuppies sell their McMansion in the trendy areas of the city and they decide to do the sea change, tree change thing, it means they congregate around Ballina and Byron Bay and Lismore and places where they can buy a small acreage, which once upon a time might have been a dairy farm that's since gone broke, and they can go off there and have their little retirement agricultural intensive fantasy. And that's apparently swinging the political complexion of such electorates towards the Greens. I'd like to think that people are just waking up to themselves and realising that the Greens are the only people who've been right about everything that they've had to say. They've been right about what a silly idea it is to suck too much water out of the rivers. They've been right about what a silly idea it is to dam the rivers, and they've been right about how if irrigation exceeds precipitation, then salination is inevitable, because, the Babylonians figured that one out 5,000 years ago when they first started bringing up well water and watering their crops with it, because they'd cut down the trees, and when you cut down the trees, it stops raining. They wanted to keep farming where they'd switched the rain off, so they invented irrigation, and then they invented salination, and then their civilization fell on its ass, and, Iraq is still a bloody desert. So, yeah, the Greens have been right about that. they're right about the idea that mining and fracking and logging so that you can make a short-term dollar is not a sustainable method of living, and they're at least trying to come up with something better. It was kind of interesting that when Malcolm Fraser was being buried, nobody brought up the fact that the reason he was able to get the 1975, 72 to, when was it? 75 dismissal. The reason he was able to get that through was because he was kicking up a stink about how wicked and evil the Labor Party was to be trying to borrow petrodollars from an Arab, for God's sake. I mean, like proper colonial English dominoes just did not borrow money from the Arabs. You might not have had to pay interest on the loan. And how would that set in London? So anyway, he was trying to borrow petrodollars from the Arabs to set up a kind of a government subsidised Australian Silicon Valley in the hinterlands inland from the Gold Coast, so that we'd actually have some industry other than, you know, putting fishnet stockings on our teenagers and having them work in topless bars for the benefit of overseas tourists who, well, maybe they're not going to want to go on long holidays sitting in aeroplanes wondering about the mental health of the pilots. How's that? You know, back in the days when everybody was so terrified about the idea that the passengers might hijack the airliners, they come up with Fort Knox type electronic deadlock super hooper duper doors on the cockpit. And now some sort of a neo-Nazi kamikaze Lufthansa depressed pilot with an eyesight problem has put 150 or 149 people, because he meant to put himself into the side of the hill, but he's taken 149 other people along as a kind of an honour guard, I suppose. Isn't that the way self-obsessed warriors like to see it? If they're going to die, they're going to go out in a blaze of glory, and they're going to take a whole bunch of other people with them so that they've got an honour guard when they come to the Styx River or to the Valhalla or whatever their afterlife fantasy happens to be. Yeah, so I wonder what the lobby for the legalisation of unmanned aerial vehicles and pilotless airliners is going to have to say about this. It sure makes having a robot and a black box instead of emotionally unreliable human beings up at the front of your airliner. It makes the idea of having a robot look pretty interesting. I've always been against the idea of automated airliners and all the rest of it, but considering that this is not the first time that airline pilots have supposedly decided to kill themselves by taking the whole cabin with them, maybe the people who want freedom to fly drones on automatic pilot by robot control are going to jump onto this. It could be an interesting bandwagon. Why is having one of the airline stewards or stewardesses in the cockpit going to make it so much better? You reckon they're going to be expert psychiatrists who are going to talk a suicidal co-pilot out of making a vertical death dive into a mountain? What are the psychiatric qualifications of cabin attendants on airliners? Could be an interesting question, couldn't it? So, Fraser's dead. The Liberals are back in New South Wales. The Greens have won 4 seats. And hopefully, as global warming's extreme weather continues to hammer the economy and the insurance premium prices go up, more businesses will fold and people might stop burning carbon, because the only way to stop them from doing it is apparently to crash the economy. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. That's been the week that was. Ciao.